So, as it turns out, it appears we do have some evidence to accept the traditional account and place Thales at the beginning as the very first of the ancient Greek philosophers. Thales is evidently conducting a certain type of rational inquiry. He is looking for first principles, or rather a first principle, a principle that can relate to and help to explain and make comprehensible everything, all of nature, all of our world, the world that we live in. But water? Why water? Well, here we might turn back to Aristotle again and see if he offers us any assistance. And he does, in the same passage that's in your books that we were reading from earlier. After telling us that Thales is the founder of this kind of philosophy, this search for principles, Aristotle continues. He says, okay, Thales says that the first principle is water. Perhaps getting this conception from observing. All right, so let's stop there for just a moment before we see what it is that he observes. Notice this word, perhaps. Aristotle says that perhaps Thales got this conception from some kind of observation. So what does that tell us? That tells us that Aristotle doesn't really know for sure. He's looking too at fragments, not at a complete account that Thales may or may not ever have written, but he's looking at what tradition is handed down to him and trying to make some kind of sense out of it, trying to make it plausible. Okay, let's go on. Perhaps what? Perhaps Thales gets this conception from observing that everything derives its nourishment from what is moist, and that the hot itself arises from and lives off it, and the thing from which the hot comes to be is the source of everything else. He gets his conceptions both from this fact and from the fact that the seeds of all things have a moist nature, and also the fact that water is the source of growth for moist things. So there seems to be an appeal to life and growth that we see all around us in nature. We cannot live without water. Seeds need water to grow. Everything that comes into existence in the world, at least certainly living things, seem to be dependent upon water. Notice also how Aristotle talks about water here. He talks about it in terms of a quality. He's not talking about it so much as a stuff, right? Not as H2O or some equivalent Greek conception of a particular thing. He's talking about it in terms of qualities. Okay? Water is moist. What is wet and moist can make things happen. Okay? He associates it with another quality, with the hot. What is hot relies in some sense on this, in his view. So he's talking about water as something that bears certain qualities that can cause things to happen. So I see a watery principle, something that is liquid and wet here. Maybe it can be a source and a cause for other sorts of transformations to happen. This is a way to connect things together. So maybe he's looking for some sort of rationale. What sort of properties does what we call water have? Okay, in general, any kind of liquid stuff. Okay? What sort of properties does that have that can relate to other things, that can allow us to see transformations into other things? It's also been suggested that perhaps water is maybe the one of the traditional elements, earth, air, fire, and water, the single one that at ordinary temperatures in our lived experience we encounter in different forms, solid, liquid, and gaseous. When it freezes, water turns hard. At normal, comfortable, everyday temperatures, water is liquid and we can drink it out of a glass. If we heat it up over the fire, it vaporizes, it turns to steam, and vanishes into the air. We also see water forming in some sense, some way in the clouds, and then coming down as rain, the rain disappearing into the earth and flowing elsewhere. So maybe there are other things that we can encounter in nature that suggests that water is a starting point for transformation into other forms, other things that we encounter in nature. And maybe you have some other ideas about how water might be an explanatory principle for nature as you look carefully through the text, through these fragments, all of which have been taken out of other Greek thinkers who lived much later than Thales. And please do note that I'm not going to be going through absolutely everything that you read in your text. I'm just giving you here a few suggestions, a few examples, some hints as to how to go about looking at these texts. Just as these ancient philosophers are looking about them and conducting a kind of inquiry, you have to conduct your own inquiry when you look at these texts. Try to put yourself into the text as much as possible. Speculate, think about what might be going on there. Next time we'll think a little bit more about this concept of an arche, a starting point or a first principle that we find in Thales and in really virtually all of the other pre-Socratic philosophers.